Marcus Brennan's hands were still shaking when he paid for a stranger's motel room at 2:47 a.m. Not from fear, not from cold, from something he couldn't name. The girl had already turned toward the door, already accepted she'd be sleeping somewhere else tonight, somewhere without locks, somewhere without walls. And he'd opened his mouth. Now she stood 3 feet away, staring at the key card in her palm like it was evidence of a crime she hadn't committed yet. "Thank you," she whispered. Marcus nodded, said nothing, took his own key from the clerk and walked out into the rain, but his heart was pounding like he'd just defused a bomb. Why? Let's rewind. 2 hours earlier, Marcus had been 60 miles north on Highway 9, heading toward a job interview he didn't need, and a future he hadn't asked for. Retirement looked good on paper. In practice, it felt like watching his purpose leak out through a hole he couldn't patch. 22 years in the Army, 2 combat tours, a medical discharge that came with a handshake, a pension, and a suggestion to take it easy. Taking it easy was killing him slower than any firefight ever could. So when an old service buddy called about a security position at some corporate firm, Marcus said yes before hearing the salary. Didn't matter what it paid. Mattered that it gave him somewhere to be at 0600. The highway closure rerouted him onto back roads that Google Maps treated like suggestions, not directions. The rain came down in sheets. His windshield wipers were losing the fight. When the Riverside Inn's neon sign appeared through the downpour, it looked less like a destination and more like surrender. He pulled into the parking lot. 3 cars total, all decade-old sedans, all wearing that specific kind of grime that comes from being driven hard and washed never. The motel office had plexiglass separating customers from the clerk. That told Marcus everything he needed to know about the neighborhood. The smell, burnt coffee, artificial flowers, black mold, told him everything else. The man behind the glass was watching television with the volume barely audible. 60s, gray stubble, name tag that read Glenn, in letters rubbed half invisible by time. Marcus approached the counter. "Need a room?" Glenn didn't look up. 68, cash or card, checkout's 10. Marcus slid his card under the slot. The machine made sounds like it was considering retirement, too. That's when the door opened behind him. The girl walked in like she'd done this 100 times before. Thin jacket, jeans with blown-out knees. Sneakers held together with hope and duct tape. A backpack that sagged under weight. A duffel bag that had seen better years. But it was her eyes that made Marcus's throat tighten. Alert, scanning, calculating exits and threats and possibilities in the span of a breath. He knew those eyes. He'd seen them in Kandahar, in Mosul, in the faces of people who'd learned that survival is a math problem you solve every single day. She walked to the counter. No hesitation. "I need a room for tonight." Glenn glanced up. His eyes did the assessment. Young, female, alone. His expression didn't change, but something in his posture did. $68. The girl pulled out a small zippered pouch. Her fingers moved with the precision of someone who'd counted this money multiple times already. 1s, 5s, a few 10s. She laid them on the counter in neat rows. "I have 53. Glenn shook his head before she finished speaking. "Can't help you. I can pay the rest tomorrow, first thing. I've stayed here before. Policy is policy. I paid last time. And I'm glad you did." Glenn's voice carried all the warmth of a DMV rejection letter. "But tonight it's 68 up front or nothing." The girl didn't argue, didn't beg, didn't cry. She gathered the bills with the same careful precision she'd used to lay them down. Tucked them back into the pouch. Tucked the pouch back into her jacket. Her shoulders reset. Her grip tightened on the duffel strap. She turned toward the door, toward the rain, toward wherever people go when they're $15 short of shelter. Marcus's mouth opened before his brain approved the words. "Wait." The girl stopped. Glenn looked up. Marcus kept his eyes on the clerk. "Put her room on my card. Separate transaction." "Sir," the girl started. "I didn't ask." Marcus's voice came out harder than he intended. He softened it. "Just take the room." Glenn's fingers hovered over the keyboard. "You sure about this?" "Ring it up." The transaction took 40 seconds. Glenn printed 2 receipts. Slid 2 key cards across the counter. Room 14 for Marcus. Room 12 for the girl. She stood there holding the card like it might evaporate. "Thank you." Her voice was barely audible, but it wasn't gratitude in her tone. It was something else. Something that sounded like suspicion. Marcus took his key, nodded once, walked out. He didn't wait for more conversation, didn't need her backstory, didn't want her thanks to curdle into obligation. Outside, the rain had dropped to a drizzle. He passed room 12 on the way to his own, saw her shadow moving behind the curtain, saw the light flick on. Room 14 smelled like every cheap motel in America. He dropped his bag, kicked off his boots, lay down fully dressed on top of the comforter. His hands were still shaking. $68. In the context of his life, it was nothing. A tank of gas, a decent meal, pocket change. So why did it feel like he'd just made a decision that weighed more than the amount? Why did helping one stranger in a failing motel feel less like charity and more like stepping onto a scale designed to measure something he didn't understand? Marcus stared at the water-stained ceiling. The rain picked up again. Somewhere in the distance, a door closed. He had no idea the girl wasn't sleeping. He had no idea she was writing everything down. He had no idea that in 9 hours he'd walk into his new job and discover that mercy always has witnesses. Even when you think you're alone, why does a man who survived war feel like $68 just put him on trial? The door to room 12 locked with a click that sounded louder than it should. The girl didn't move for 30 seconds, just stood there, back pressed against the door, hand still on the deadbolt, listening. No footsteps outside, no knock, no voice saying he'd changed his mind. Good. She dropped the duffel bag, shrugged off the backpack. Both hit the floor with thuds that said they'd been carried too long. Her shoulders ached, her feet screamed. She ignored both. The room was exactly what $68 bought. One bed with a floral comforter that had seen 1,000 strangers. One desk bolted to the wall. One bathroom with a fan that rattled like it had asthma. The carpet had stains that told stories she didn't want to imagine. But it had a lock. 4 walls. A roof that didn't leak. For tonight, that was everything. She walked to the window, drew the curtain back 1 inch. Just enough to see the parking lot. 3 cars still. The office lights still on. Glenn probably still watching his silent television. No movement. She let the curtain fall, turned to the desk, unzipped the front pocket of her backpack, pulled out a spiral notebook, the kind kids use for middle school. 70 pages. Half of them already filled with tight, precise handwriting. Notes that looked random to anyone else but formed a pattern if you knew what you were looking for. She sat on the edge of the bed, clicked open a pen, started writing. November 16th, 2:51 a.m., Riverside Inn. Subject, Marcus Brennan. Late 40s, military bearing. Doesn't make eye contact when he speaks. Paid for room without hesitation. Didn't ask questions, didn't want conversation. Left immediately after transaction. Reaction time, 4 seconds between rejection and intervention. Body language, tense shoulders. Controlled breathing. Hands steady despite decision speed. Voice pattern direct. No filler words. Gave order to clerk, not request. Assessment. She stopped writing. Stared at that last word. Assessment. That's what this was supposed to be. Assessment, observation, data collection. But something about tonight felt different. 4 seconds. That's how long it took Marcus Brennan to decide a stranger's shelter mattered more than $68. Most people took longer to choose coffee. She'd watched 17 people walk past her outside a grocery store last month. Watch them see her. Watch them look away. Watch them pretend she was part of the landscape. She'd sat on a bench outside a library for 3 hours last week. Asked 8 people for spare change. Got $2.40. Got 3 lectures about bootstraps and bad choices. But this man, this stranger in a failing motel at 3 in the morning, saw a problem and fixed it before she finished breathing. Why? She flipped back through the notebook. Scanned previous entries. October 22nd, bus station. Woman offered jacket. Seemed genuine, wanted to help. Also wanted life story, phone number. And church attendance. October 8th, coffee shop. Man bought meal, insisted on sitting together. Asked invasive questions. Followed to parking lot, September 30th, library. Woman gave $20, took photo. Posted on social media within minutes. Blessed/pay it forward. Kindness matters. Everyone had an angle. Everyone wanted something in return. Gratitude, validation, proof of their goodness. A story to tell at dinner parties. But Marcus Brennan walked away, didn't take a photo, didn't ask her name, didn't need her tears or her testimony, just paid and left. Like her shelter was a fact, not a favor. She wrote 3 more lines. Question: does kindness without witness still count as performance? Question: what does he gain from anonymity? Question: why does this feel like a test I didn't study for? Her phone buzzed. 1 new message. Oh, she didn't need to open it to know what it said. Same message she got every night at this time. Same 4 words. Are you safe tonight? She typed back. Yes. 3 dots appeared, then disappeared, then appeared again. Good. See you tomorrow. Don't be late. She set the phone face down on the desk. Looked around the room again. The bed she wouldn't sleep in. The shower she'd used to wash away 3 days of bus stations and park benches and polite rejection. The mirror she'd stand in front of at 6 a.m. to practice, looking like someone who hadn't spent the night documenting a stranger's mercy. Tomorrow, everything would change. Tomorrow, she'd walk into a building where people wore suits and spoke in acronyms and pretended the world was fair. Tomorrow, she'd stand in a boardroom and watch faces react to information they didn't see coming. Tomorrow, Marcus Brennan would learn that kindness is never private, that every action gets recorded, that someone is always watching. But tonight, right now, in this $68 room with its rattling fan and questionable stains, she was just a girl with a notebook, trying to solve an equation that didn't add up. Why does a man help someone when no one's looking? What does integrity cost when anonymity is free? She closed the notebook, stood, walked to the bathroom, turned on the shower, and for the first time in 72 hours, allowed herself to stop performing survival. The water ran hot, the door locked. The notebook sat on the desk, waiting for tomorrow's entries. Waiting for the moment Marcus Brennan discovered that mercy always, always has an audience, even when you're certain you're alone. Marcus's alarm went off at 5:30 a.m. He silenced it before the second beep. Old habit. 22 years of early formations trained his body to wake before the noise finished. The motel room looked worse in daylight. Water stains on the ceiling formed patterns that resembled countries he'd deployed to. The curtains had cigarette burns, even though this was supposedly a non-smoking room. Outside, the parking lot was empty except for his truck and one sedan that might have been abandoned. Room 12's curtains were still drawn. Marcus showered, shaved, put on the only suit he owned, charcoal gray, purchased specifically for this interview 3 weeks ago. The fabric still had store creases. He'd never worn it, never needed to. The Army had uniforms for everything. Civilian life required guessing what professionalism looked like. He checked out at the office. Different clerk this time, younger, didn't make eye contact, just processed the checkout and slid the receipt under the plexiglass without a word. The drive into the city took 40 minutes. Traffic built gradually as farmland gave way to suburbs. Suburbs gave way to commercial districts, and commercial districts gave way to glass towers that reflected morning sun like warnings. Hartwell Solutions occupied floors 12 through 17 of a building that looked like every other corporate monument to success. Marcus parked in the visitor section, checked his tie in the rearview mirror, grabbed the folder containing his resume, his DD-214, and 3 letters of recommendation he'd never actually read. The lobby had marble floors and a security desk manned by 2 guards who looked bored enough to be dangerous. Marcus signed in, got a visitor badge, was directed to the 12th floor. The elevator smelled like expensive cologne and quiet desperation. He stepped out into a reception area designed to intimidate, floor-to-ceiling windows, furniture that cost more than his truck. A receptionist behind a desk made of something that might have been mahogany or might have been engineered to look expensive. "Marcus Brennan," he said. "I have an appointment at 8. She smiled, with teeth too white to be real. "Of course. Mr. Brennan, they're expecting you. Conference room B, down the hall, 3rd door on your left." He followed the directions. The hallway had photographs of executives shaking hands with people Marcus assumed were important. Awards in frames. Certifications that proved the company took itself seriously. Conference room B had a table that could seat 20. Currently, it held 7 people. 6 men in suits that actually fit. 1 woman in a blazer that probably cost what Marcus made in a month during his E7 days. They all looked up when he entered. "Mr. Brennan," the woman stood, extended her hand. "Veronica Chen, VP of Operations, thank you for coming in." Her handshake was firm, professional, the kind that said she'd practiced it. "Thank you for the opportunity," Marcus replied. She gestured to an empty chair. "Please, sit. We're just waiting for one more person before we begin." Marcus sat. The chair was leather, comfortable, designed for people who made decisions that affected other people's mortgages. The 6 men introduced themselves. Names Marcus forgot immediately. Titles that blurred together. Director of this. Senior manager of that. Everyone smiled. Everyone had questions prepared on notepads in front of them. This wasn't an interview. This was a panel. Marcus's chest tightened slightly. He'd faced enemy fire with less anxiety than he felt sitting in a room full of people who'd never worn a uniform, but somehow held all the power. Veronica checked her watch. "He should be here any moment." "He?" Marcus asked. "Our CEO. He likes to sit in on final stage interviews personally, especially for security positions." Marcus nodded. Tried to look like this was normal. Tried not to calculate how much this job apparently mattered if the CEO showed up. The door opened. A man walked in. Mid-50s. Tailored suit that moved like water. Gray at the temples. Calm expression. The kind of face that had learned to reveal nothing. He carried himself like someone who'd forgotten what it felt like to ask permission. Every person at the table straightened slightly. The man closed the door. walked to the head of the table, set down a leather portfolio. His eyes swept the room, paused on Marcus, held there for 3 seconds. Marcus felt his pulse tick up. Something in that gaze felt familiar, felt calculated, felt like being assessed by someone who already knew the answer. "Good morning," the man said. His voice was quiet, controlled. "I'm Richard Navarro. I run this company." He pulled out the chair at the head of the table, sat, folded his hands, looked directly at Marcus. "Before we begin, Mr. Brennan, I want to ask you about last night." The room went silent. Marcus's stomach dropped. Richard's expression didn't change. Specifically, about a motel called the Riverside Inn. Every eye turned to Marcus. "You were there around 3 a.m., correct?" Marcus's mouth went dry. "Yes, sir." Richard nodded slowly. "And you paid for someone else's room." It wasn't a question. Marcus didn't know how to answer something that wasn't being asked. "I did," he said. Richard leaned back in his chair. "Tell me why." Marcus's brain ran through possibilities in half a second. Camera footage, credit card records, small-town gossip networks. Maybe Glenn the desk clerk had a side hustle selling information to corporate background checkers. None of it mattered. The question was simple. The answer should be two. "She was $15 short," Marcus said. It was raining, middle of the night. Seemed like the right thing to do. Richard's expression remained neutral. He didn't nod. Didn't smile. Didn't give any indication whether that was the right answer or the wrong one. "The right thing," Richard repeated. Interesting phrase. Veronica shifted in her seat. The other executives looked like they were watching a tennis match they didn't understand the rules to. Richard opened his portfolio, pulled out a single sheet of paper, slid it across the table toward Marcus. It was a printed screenshot. Security camera footage. Timestamp: 2:49 a.m. Location: Riverside Inn office. 2 figures visible at the counter. Marcus and the girl. "Our company has various interests," Richard said. "Real estate among them. The Riverside Inn is one of 43 properties we acquired last year. Low-performing assets. We're evaluating which to keep, which to upgrade, which to sell." Marcus stared at the image. At himself, caught in grainy black and white, sliding his credit card under plexiglass. "Part of that evaluation," Richard continued, "involves understanding how these properties operate, how staff treat customers, how policies get enforced, how people behave when they think no one important is watching." The weight in Marcus's chest shifted. This wasn't about him, or maybe it was entirely about him. "We installed updated camera systems 6 weeks ago," Richard said. "Better resolution, cloud storage, live monitoring capability. Last night, our overnight security team flagged an interaction at the Riverside Inn. Flagged it because it violated standard protocol." Marcus found his voice. "Violated how?" "You paid for someone else's room. That creates liability issues, receipt discrepancies, potential fraud indicators." Richard's tone remained even. Clinical. "Our security analyst almost filed it as suspicious activity." "Almost," Marcus repeated. "Almost." Richard pulled the photo back. "But then they reviewed the full footage, watched the entire interaction, watched you pay without negotiation, watched you leave without expecting anything in return, watched the girl stand in that room for 8 minutes before she even moved." The room was silent except for the hum of the air conditioning. "So, I watched it too," Richard said. "Then I made some calls. Found out you had an interview here this morning. Found out the timing was either remarkable coincidence or something else entirely." Marcus felt the trap closing but couldn't see its shape yet. And which do you think it is? I think, Richard said slowly, that you made a choice at 3 in the morning that most people wouldn't make at 3 in the afternoon. One of the executives cleared his throat. Sir, should we... Richard raised one finger. The man stopped talking immediately. Mr. Brennan, Richard said, in your military service you held a security clearance. You had access to sensitive information. You made decisions under pressure. You were trusted with resources and authority. He paused. Tell me what you think integrity means. Marcus didn't hesitate. Doing the right thing when it costs you something, and when no one's watching, especially then. Richard nodded once. Why especially? Because that's when it's actually integrity, Marcus said. When there's an audience, it might just be performance. Something flickered in Richard's eyes. Not quite approval. Not quite surprise. Something else. The girl you helped last night, Richard said. Did you ask her name? No, sir. Did you ask why she needed the room? No, sir. Did you expect gratitude, recognition, anything at all? No, sir. Then why do it? Marcus met his gaze. Because she needed shelter and I had $68. The silence stretched. Richard closed his portfolio. Everyone in this room has a college degree. Most have MBAs. All have passed background checks, personality assessments, and multiple interview rounds. He looked at each executive in turn. And not one of them can tell me what you just demonstrated. Veronica leaned forward. Sir, I'm not sure I follow. Richard stood, buttoned his suit jacket. Mr. Brennan just showed us something we can't teach, can't test for. Can't measure in an interview. He walked around the table, stopped next to Marcus's chair. Character, Richard said quietly. Real character. The kind that operates the same way at 3 a.m. in a failing motel as it does at 8 a.m. in a boardroom. Marcus didn't know what to say, so he said nothing. Richard extended his hand. Welcome to Hartwell Solutions, Mr. Brennan. You start Monday. Marcus shook his hand. The interview is over, Richard said. You passed it last night. He walked toward the door, stopped, turned back. One more thing, the girl you helped? Marcus nodded. Richard's expression finally changed. Just slightly, just enough. You're about to meet her. The door opened before Marcus could process what Richard had just said. The girl walked in. Same dark eyes, same alert posture. Completely different everything else. Her hair was pulled back. Professional. Clean. The duct-taped duffel and worn sneakers were gone. In their place, pressed slacks, a blazer that actually fit, shoes without holes. But it was her face that stopped Marcus's breath. No exhaustion, no desperation, no careful blankness of someone trying to survive the next 6 hours. Just calm, controlled, focused. She walked to Richard's side, stood there like she'd done it 1,000 times, like she belonged. Marcus's stomach twisted. Mr. Brennan, Richard said, this is my daughter, Kira Navarro. The room tilted. Marcus heard the words, understood them individually, but together they formed a sentence that didn't connect to reality. Daughter? The girl who couldn't afford a motel room was the daughter of a man who owned 43 properties. The girl with the duct-taped bag was standing in a boardroom like she owned half the furniture. The girl he'd helped had never needed help at all. I don't understand, Marcus said. His voice sounded far away. Kira spoke for the first time. You weren't supposed to. Her voice was different, too. Still quiet, but no longer small, no longer performing. Last night was an evaluation, Richard said. He moved back to his chair but didn't sit. One we conduct on every final stage security candidate. We need people who make good decisions when no one's grading them. When there's no incentive, no audience, no reward. Marcus looked at Kira, at the same eyes that had watched him in the motel office, at the same person who'd counted $53 with shaking fingers. "You were acting," he said. "Yes," Kira replied, no apology in her tone. "The money, the bag, Marcus stopped. "All of it was fake." "Not the money," she said. "That was real, 53 actual dollars. I counted it 6 times before going in. Why? Because if the money was fake, the test would be 2. She pulled out the chair across from Marcus, sat. "People can sense performance. I needed you to see someone who actually needed help." Richard placed a hand on the back of her chair. 4 years ago, we had a security director who passed every background check. Every reference gleamed. Every credential verified. His voice hardened. 6 months in, we discovered he'd been selling access codes to a competitor. Cost us $17 million in stolen intellectual property. Veronica added, "He interviewed perfectly, said everything right. Knew every answer. But he'd never been tested when it mattered," Richard finished. "So we changed our approach." Marcus's hands gripped the armrests. "You send your daughter into motels at 3 a.m. to test strangers?" "Controlled environments," Kira said. "Properties we own. Staff we've briefed. Security watching every angle. I'm never in danger." "You looked," Marcus stopped himself. "Desperate?" Kira's expression didn't change. "Hungry? Scared? That's the point. That's what people who actually need help look like. If I showed up clean and confident, you'd know something was wrong." Richard sat now, folded his hands on the table. "We've run this evaluation 11 times in the past 2 years. 8 candidates ignored her completely. 2 paid but asked invasive questions, expected stories. Wanted proof she deserved help. And me?" Marcus asked. "You paid and left," Kira said simply. "No questions, no conditions, no need for my gratitude to validate your choice." Marcus looked at each face in the room. At the executives who'd watched this unfold like theater. At Veronica, who seemed unsurprised by the entire performance. At Richard, whose expression revealed nothing. At Kira, who'd turned survival into a script. "What if I hadn't helped?" Marcus asked. "Then you wouldn't be here," Richard said. "The interview would have been canceled. A polite email, budget constraints, position filled. We would have moved on." "And what if I'd done something else? Asked for something?" Kira's eyes met his. "Happened once. Candidate paid for the room, then followed me. Knocked on the door 20 minutes later. Wanted to talk, wanted to help more. Wanted..." She paused. "Other things. What happened to him?" "Security intervened in 90 seconds, Richard said. "He was escorted off the property. Police were notified. He never made it to an interview." Marcus sat back. The leather chair suddenly felt like an interrogation seat. "You use people's desperation as bait," he said quietly. "We use theater to reveal character," Richard corrected. "There's a difference." "Is there?" Kira leaned forward. "Mr. Brennan, every single day, people in power make decisions about people without it. How they treat waitstaff, janitors, delivery drivers, people they'll never see again." Her voice sharpened. "Those decisions tell the truth, not resumes, not interviews, actions when nothing's at stake." "Something was at stake," Marcus said. "Your safety. I was never unsafe. You couldn't have known that." Richard smiled for the first time. "Barely. Mr. Brennan, you just proved exactly why you passed." Marcus needed air. He needed to stand, walk. process what he'd just learned without 7 sets of eyes tracking his reaction. But he stayed seated, stayed still, trained response. When you don't understand the battlefield, you don't move until you do. "Let me make sure I understand," Marcus said slowly. "Last night wasn't random. The motel wasn't random. The timing wasn't coincidence." "Correct," Richard said. "You knew I'd be rerouted because of the highway closure. We knew the highway would be closed. We didn't know for certain you'd take that specific detour, but the probability was high." Marcus's jaw tightened. "You closed a highway." "The state closed the highway," Veronica interjected. "Scheduled maintenance. We simply monitored traffic patterns and made educated predictions about alternate routes." "And if I'd chosen a different route?" Kira answered. "Then I would have been at a different motel. We had 3 properties positioned along possible detours. Whichever one you stopped at, I'd be there within 20 minutes. Marcus looked at her. Really looked. "You followed me." "I tracked you," she corrected. "There's a difference. Your phone's GPS. Your credit card pings. Standard data most people don't realize they're broadcasting." "That's legal?" "You signed consent forms when you submitted your application," Veronica said. Paragraph 7. Subsection C. Candidates agree to preliminary security assessment protocols, including location verification. Marcus remembered signing 12 pages of documents, remembered skimming most of them, remembered thinking it was standard corporate liability coverage. "You tracked me to test me," he said. "We positioned an opportunity," Richard said. "What you did with it was entirely your choice." One of the executives spoke up. Younger guy, probably mid-30s. "Sir, should we continue with the standard interview questions or—" Richard waved him off. "Not necessary." "But protocol requires—" "Protocol," Richard said quietly, "requires that I make informed hiring decisions. I'm informed." He looked at Marcus. "Unless you have questions for us." Marcus had about 50 questions. Most of them involved whether this company operated inside legal boundaries or just near them. But one question mattered more than the others. "Why tell me?" Marcus asked. "Why not just let me think last night was real? Give me the job. Never mention it again." Kira tilted her head slightly. "Would you want to work somewhere that lied to you? You already did lie." "I performed a role in a controlled assessment. That's different from ongoing deception." "Is it?" "Yes." Her voice carried complete certainty. "One is a test with a defined end point and full disclosure afterward. The other is betrayal. We don't do betrayal." Richard stood, buttoned his jacket. "Mr. Brennan, every person in this room has been through some version of what you experienced. Different scenarios, different tests, but the same core evaluation." Veronica nodded. "I was assessed at a coffee shop. Homeless veteran asked for money. I bought him breakfast instead, sat with him for 40 minutes. Another executive spoke. "Airport. Woman's credit card got declined at the gate. I paid for her ticket upgrade." The younger one, who'd questioned protocol, added, "Grocery store. Elderly man's debit card wasn't working. I covered his bill." They each had a story. Each had passed a test they hadn't known they were taking. "And the people who failed?" Marcus asked. Richard's expression hardened. "They work somewhere else." Kira pulled out her phone, tapped the screen, turned it toward Marcus. It showed the motel office, security footage, but not from last night. Different person at the counter, different candidate. Woman in her 40s. Business casual, confident posture. Kira was there too, same performance. Same $53, same quiet request. The woman at the counter watched, listened, then pulled out her phone, took a photo of Kira, turned to Glenn and said something. The footage had no audio, but her expression said everything. Suspicious, skeptical, protective of her $68. She left without helping. She called her husband, Kira said. Told him about a scam artist at a motel. Posted on social media warning others about a girl trying to manipulate good people. Marcus's chest tightened. When was this? 3 weeks ago. She had an interview scheduled the next morning. Kira put the phone away. We canceled it. Did you tell her why? No. Richard's tone left no room for debate. She'll never know she was tested. She'll never know she failed. She'll just remember a suspicious interaction at a motel and feel justified in her caution. Marcus processed that. So, I could have failed and never known. Exactly. But you're telling me I passed. Because you're about to work here, Richard said. And I need you to understand how we operate, how we assess, how we value character over credentials. He walked to the door, opened it, looked back. You start Monday, 8 a.m. Veronica will send orientation details. He paused. And Mr. Brennan? Yes, sir. The $68. Keep the receipt. Submit it for reimbursement. Marcus blinked. Sir? Richard's expression remained neutral, but something shifted in his eyes. You passed the test, but you still helped someone. Real or not, that choice cost you something. He opened the door wider. We don't let integrity go unrewarded. He left. The room exhaled. Kira stood, extended her hand across the table. Thank you, she said, for last night. Marcus shook her hand. You never needed help. No, she agreed, but you helped anyway. The conference room emptied in stages. First, the executives. Polite nods, firm handshakes. Congratulations that sounded rehearsed because they probably were. They'd seen this before. They'd be here for the next candidate, too. Then, Veronica. She handed Marcus a folder. Everything you need for Monday, building access, parking pass, direct deposit forms, read through tonight. Questions can wait until orientation. She left. That left Marcus and Kira. She hadn't moved from her chair, just sat there watching him with those same eyes that had counted $53 12 hours ago. Marcus broke the silence. How many people actually pass? About 30%. Lower than he expected. Higher than it should be if human nature meant anything. And your father makes you do this for every security hire? Not just security, Kira said. Anyone with access to sensitive systems, anyone who'll have authority over others. Anyone whose decisions could damage people if their character doesn't match their resume. That's a lot of theater. It's a lot of protection. She stood, walked to the window, looked out at the city below. 4 years ago, before we started this, we had good people on paper, perfect interviews, stellar references, and some of them were exactly who they claimed to be. And the others? Stole, lied, harassed junior staff, covered mistakes by blaming subordinates, protected their careers at the expense of everyone else's dignity. She turned back to face him, all because we trusted words instead of watching actions. Marcus joined her at the window. 12 floors down, people moved through their mornings. Coffee runs, commutes, deadlines, none of them knowing they might be one bad decision away from an unemployment line. Your father said you've done this 11 times, Marcus said. 13, actually. 2 more since he last updated the count. That's dangerous. It's controlled. Control doesn't stop variables. What if someone, Marcus, stopped himself? What if someone, what? Kira's voice sharpened. Hurt me. That's what you were going to say. Yes? Then security intervenes. Every property has armed guards positioned within 30-second response range. I wear a panic button disguised as a bracelet. Cameras cover every angle. My father watches every evaluation in real time from his office. And if something happens faster than 30 seconds, Kira met his eyes. Then we learn that person's character in the most important way possible, and I handle it until help arrives. Marcus felt cold. You're his daughter. He shouldn't let you. He doesn't let me do anything, Kira interrupted. I volunteered. I designed half the protocols. I picked the properties. I wrote my own scripts. Why? She looked back out the window. Because I was 17 when our old security director sold access to competitors. 17 when those competitors used that access to steal research my mother had spent 8 years developing. 17 when the stress of that theft triggered the stroke that killed her. Marcus went still. She was a biochemist, Kira continued, her voice steady despite the weight of the words. Brilliant, kind. She used to say that good ideas should help people, not just make money. So when someone stole her work and rushed it to market without proper testing, and 3 people died from complications, she stopped, breathed, continued. My father blamed himself, blamed his hiring process, blamed his trust in credentials over character, blamed everything except the truth, which is that some people are excellent liars. Marcus said nothing. Let the silence hold space for what couldn't be filled with words. So I told him we needed a new system, Kira said. Something that tested people when they didn't know they were being tested. When there was no reason to perform, no incentive to pretend. And he agreed to let you be the test. He tried to hire actors. I told him actors perform for a living. They'd be recognizable to anyone paying attention. It had to be real, or real enough. She touched the window glass with one finger. It had to be me. Marcus understood then. Not just the evaluation, not just the security protocols, the grief. The need to make her mother's death mean something beyond loss. I'm sorry, he said. Kira nodded. Most people say that. Very few mean it, you mean it. How do you know? Because you didn't ask follow-up questions. Didn't dig for details, didn't treat my pain like a story you deserved to hear. She looked at him. You just held space for it. That's rare. They stood there, 2 people who'd met twice. Once in a performance. Once in truth. The notebook, Marcus said suddenly. Last night, you were writing in a notebook. Kira smiled slightly. First real smile he'd seen from her. You noticed that. Hard not to. You sat down the second you got in the room, started writing immediately. Observation notes, part of the evaluation. I document everything, body language, response time, word choice, tone. What did you write about me? She pulled out her phone, opened an app, scrolled, read aloud. Subject, Marcus Brennan. 4-second response time, no hesitation, no conditions, no questions, paid and left, conclusion. She paused, looked up. Assessment uncertain, requires further observation. Possible integrity, possible indifference, insufficient data. You weren't sure if I was good or just didn't care. Exactly, that's why the interview mattered. To see if last night was character or coincidence. And now? Kira put her phone away. Now I'm certain. Of what? That you're going to be very good at this job, and that scares me a little. Marcus frowned. Why? Because people with real integrity don't last long in environments where everyone else is performing it. She walked toward the door, stopped. Don't let this place change that. Don't let us turn your character into a costume you put on for evaluations. She left before Marcus could respond. He stood alone in the conference room, looked out at the city, at people rushing through their lives, wondered how many of them were being tested right now without knowing it, wondered if he'd just passed an evaluation or walked into something much more complicated. Marcus left the building at 9:30. The elevator ride down felt longer than the ride up. He watched floor numbers descend and tried to organize 12 hours of information into something that made sense. A test disguised as kindness. A daughter playing homeless to catch liars. A company that tracked candidates like military assets. A job he'd gotten before the interview even started. The lobby was busier now. People in suits moved with purpose. Conversations happened in clusters near the coffee stand. Everyone looked important. Everyone looked like they belonged. Marcus wondered how many of them had been tested, how many had passed, how many even knew. He pushed through the glass doors into morning sun that felt too bright. The parking garage was across the street. He waited for the light, watched cars pass, noticed things he hadn't noticed on the way in. Security cameras on every corner, discreet, professional, the kind that didn't advertise their presence. A homeless man sitting against the building next door, cardboard sign, empty cup. 3 people walked past him in the time it took the light to change. None of them stopped. None of them looked. Marcus's stomach twisted. Was this another test? Was someone watching to see if he'd help? If he'd give money? If he'd stop and talk or keep walking like everyone else? He stood there. Light turned green. Crosswalk signal blinked. The man looked up, made eye contact. Marcus pulled out his wallet, grabbed a 20, walked over. "Here," he said. The man blinked, looked at the bill. "God bless you, brother." Marcus nodded, walked away, made it 3 steps before he stopped, turned back. "You hungry?" The man's eyes widened. Yeah. I could eat." "There's a diner 2 blocks that way." Marcus pointed. "Tell them Marcus sent you. Get whatever you want. I'll call ahead." He pulled out his phone. Called the diner he'd passed on his way into the city. Spoke to someone named Rita. Explained the situation. She said she'd take care of it. Marcus hung up. The man was staring at him. "Why?" he asked. Marcus didn't have an answer that didn't sound rehearsed, so he told the truth. "Because I can." He walked away, made it to the parking garage this time. Got in his truck, sat there, looked back at the building. No one rushed out, no one flagged him down. No one appeared to tell him he'd passed another secret evaluation. Just morning traffic, just people, just a city moving forward. Marcus started the engine. His phone buzzed. Unknown number. He answered. "Hello, Mr. Brennan." Richard's voice. "I'm watching security footage from across the street." Marcus's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "Of course you are." "That wasn't a test." "How do I know that?" "You don't." Richard paused. "But I'm telling you anyway, that man isn't affiliated with Hartwell. We don't own that building. We don't monitor that corner. That was just you being you." Marcus exhaled. "Then why call?" "Because I want you to understand something before Monday. The evaluation is over. Last night was a test. This morning was confirmation. But what you just did, that wasn't for us, that was for you." "I don't follow." "You helped that man because you thought we might be watching. Which means you're still performing. Still worried about being judged. Still operating like you're under surveillance." Marcus said nothing. "Here's what I need you to hear," Richard continued. "The job is yours. Not conditional, not probationary. Yours. You can stop auditioning. You can stop second-guessing every decision based on whether someone's grading you. Hard to do when you just admitted you're watching security footage." I'm watching because I'm paranoid and overprotective of my company, not because I'm evaluating you." Richard's tone softened slightly. "Marcus, we hired you because of who you are when no one's watching. Don't let us turn you into someone who's always performing for an audience." The same thing Kira had said. Father and daughter, same warning. "What if I can't tell the difference anymore?" Marcus asked. Silence on the line, then, "That's the real test. Not what you do, but why you do it. If you can answer that honestly, you'll be fine. And if I can't, then this job will eat you alive, like it does everyone who forgets the difference between character and performance." The line went dead. Marcus sat in his truck, engine running, heat blasting even though it wasn't cold. He thought about the homeless man, about the $20, about the diner. Had he done it because it was right, or because he thought someone was watching? Both? Neither? He didn't know anymore. And that terrified him more than any evaluation ever could, because if Richard was right, if Kira was right, then the real test wasn't last night in a motel. It was every morning after. Every decision made when the only witness was the mirror. Every moment he had to choose between who he was and who he thought he should be. Marcus put the truck in reverse, pulled out of the parking garage, drove toward a future that suddenly felt much more complicated than a job. He had 4 days until Monday. 4 days to figure out if Marcus Brennan was a person or a performance. 4 days to decide if he could work for a company that had tested his character, without letting them change it. Marcus spent the weekend in his apartment doing nothing. Not avoiding, not preparing, just existing in the space between who he'd been and who he was about to become. Saturday morning, he went to the gym, ran 5 miles, lifted weights until his muscles burned, showered, ate breakfast, watched half a movie he'd already seen. Saturday afternoon, he called his sister in Phoenix, told her about the job, left out the part about the test. She was happy for him, said their mother would be proud. They talked for 20 minutes before her kids needed something and she had to go. Saturday night, he sat on his balcony and watched traffic move through the streets below, wondered how many of those people knew what integrity cost, wondered how many had ever been tested when it mattered. Sunday, he cleaned his apartment, did laundry, organized the closet he'd been ignoring for 3 months, made a grocery list, went shopping, came home, cooked a meal that tasted like responsibility. Sunday evening, his phone rang. Kira. He almost didn't answer, but he did. Mr. Brennan," she said. "Hope I'm not interrupting." "Just sitting here. You?" "Same. Well, not sitting. Walking. I think better when I move." Marcus could hear city noise in the background. Traffic. Voices. Life happening around her. "I wanted to apologize," Kira said. That caught him off guard. For what? For the test, for the performance, for making you question whether your kindness was real or strategic. She paused. "My father thinks our system is clean, controlled, ethical, but I've been doing this long enough to know what it costs the people who pass." Marcus leaned back in his chair. What does it cost? Doubt, paranoia, the constant question of whether you're being watched, whether every interaction is another evaluation, whether the person next to you is real or planted. Her voice carried weight. "We test character by putting people in manufactured scenarios. But manufactured scenarios teach people that nothing is real, that everyone might be acting, that trust is a liability. You think I don't trust you? I think you shouldn't trust me. Not yet. I lied to you, convincingly, for hours. With props and scripted reactions and rehearsed desperation." She exhaled. "How do you trust someone after that?" Marcus considered the question. You told me the truth when you didn't have to. Your father could have hired me and never mentioned the test. I would have worked there for years, thinking I'd earned it through an interview. Would that have been better? No, but it would have been easier. Kira laughed quietly, bitter sound. Easier for us, maybe. Not for you. You would have spent every day wondering why they hired you. What you'd said in the interview that was so impressive. You would have performed that person forever. She was right. Marcus knew it before she finished the sentence. The truth makes you free, Kira continued, even when it's ugly, even when it complicates everything. You know now that we hired you for what you did at 3 a.m. in a motel when you thought no one important was watching. That's yours. That's real. No matter how manufactured the scenario was, your response wasn't. How do you know? Because you didn't hesitate. 4 seconds, Marcus. Most people take longer to choose a sandwich. You saw a problem and fixed it before your brain could calculate cost-benefit analysis. That's not performance. That's reflex. That's character hardwired so deep it doesn't need to think. Marcus closed his eyes. And the man outside the building Friday morning? What about him? Was that you testing me again? No, that was you testing yourself. Her footsteps echoed. She must have moved into a quieter area. My father told you the evaluation was over. I told you not to perform. And the first thing you did was help someone while wondering if we were watching. What does that tell you? That I'm paranoid. That you're struggling to separate action from motive. That you're questioning whether you're good or just trained to look good. She stopped walking. Marcus, can I tell you something my mother used to say? Yeah. She said the difference between a good person and a good performer is what happens when the audience leaves. Performers rest. Good people keep going because the actions aren't for applause. They're for the person in the mirror. Marcus opened his eyes, stared at his ceiling. Your mother sounds wise. She was, until someone's bad character killed her. Kira's voice hardened, then softened. Sorry, I shouldn't have. It's okay. It's not. But thank you for saying it. She started walking again. I called because I wanted you to know something before Monday. You're going to meet a lot of people. Some of them passed evaluations like yours. Some didn't have to because they were hired before we started testing. And you're not going to know which is which. That's the point, isn't it? To make everyone equal. That's the theory. The reality is messier. Some people who passed still perform. Some people who weren't tested have better character than the ones who were. And some people game the system by figuring out what we're looking for and becoming that person just long enough to get hired. Marcus frowned. You can test for that? We try, but humans are complicated. Character isn't binary. People aren't pass-fail. She sighed. I guess what I'm saying is don't expect Monday to be clearer than Friday. Don't expect everyone there to operate like you do. And don't let our system convince you that character is something you measure instead of something you live. Kira. Yeah? Why are you really calling? Silence. Then quietly, because I saw your face Friday morning when you realized the test was over. You looked relieved, and then you looked terrified, and I know that feeling. I know what it's like to realize that being yourself is harder than passing evaluations. You're the one who designed this. I know. That's why I recognize the damage. She laughed without humor. I built a system to catch liars and ended up teaching honest people to question their own motives. Marcus stood, walked to his window, looked out at the same city Kira was walking through somewhere. So, what do I do Monday? He asked. Show up, do the job, help people when they need it, and stop asking yourself why. That simple? That impossible, Kira corrected. But try anyway. She hung up. Marcus stood there holding his phone. Tomorrow was Monday. Tomorrow he'd walk into a building where everyone had secrets and no one knew who'd been tested. Tomorrow he'd start a job he'd earned by being himself when he thought no one was watching. The only question left was whether he could keep being that person now that everyone was. Monday morning, 7:45 a.m. Marcus stood in the Hartwell Solutions lobby wearing the same charcoal suit. Different tie, same uncertainty. The building looked identical to Friday. Same marble floors, same expensive furniture. Same security desk with the same 2 guards who looked bored enough to be dangerous. But everything felt different. Because now he knew the cameras weren't just for security. Knew the evaluations didn't stop at hiring. Knew that someone, somewhere, might be watching to see if Friday's Marcus matched Monday's Marcus. He signed in, got his permanent badge, took the elevator to 12. Veronica met him in the reception area. Right on time. Good. Follow me. She walked fast, talked faster, explained building protocols, system access, reporting structures, emergency procedures. Marcus absorbed about half of it, made mental notes to ask questions later. They stopped at a door marked Security Operations. "Your office," Veronica said. "Well, shared office. You'll have 2 analysts reporting to you and 1 coordinator. They're good people. They know you're new. They'll help." She opened the door. 3 people looked up from their desks. 2 men, 1 woman. Mid-20s to early 30s. They stood when Marcus entered. Veronica made introductions. "Marcus Brennan, this is your team. Devin handles physical security monitoring. Tasha runs digital threat assessment. Kyle coordinates response protocols." Handshakes, polite smiles. Welcome to the team pleasantries. Veronica left. Marcus stood in his new office with 3 strangers who'd become his responsibility. Devin spoke first. "Sir, we put together a briefing packet on current security posture. Figured you'd want to review before making any changes." "I'm not here to make changes," Marcus said. "I'm here to learn what you already know." Tasha blinked. Most new directors come in with their own systems. Want to reorganize everything. I'm not most directors. Marcus pulled out the 4th chair, sat. "Tell me what works, tell me what doesn't. Tell me what keeps you up at night." They exchanged glances. Kyle leaned back. "You want the diplomatic answer or the real one?" "Real. What keeps me up is wondering if the person I'm protecting is worth protecting. If the executive I'm running background checks on is actually clean or just good at hiding dirt. If the system we built to catch bad actors is actually working or just making us feel safe." Marcus nodded slowly. "How long have you worked here?" 3 years. "You ever been tested? The evaluation, the scenario?" Kyle's expression closed. "Can't talk about that." "Can't or won't?" "Both. We sign NDAs about evaluation methods. Keeps the system clean." "Even with each other?" Tasha answered. "Especially with each other. If we know who passed what test, we start treating them differently, trusting them more or less. It poisons the dynamic." Marcus understood, but he didn't like it. "So we're all strangers," he said, "working together, protecting each other, and none of us knows who's been vetted and who hasn't." Devin shrugged. "Welcome to Hartwell." They briefed him for 2 hours, showed him monitoring systems, threat assessment protocols, response hierarchies. Everything was organized, professional, thorough. Everything operated on the assumption that character could be measured and trust could be systematized. At 10 o'clock, Marcus's computer chimed. Calendar notification. Meeting with Richard Navarro, 11 a.m., his office. Marcus excused himself. Took the elevator to 17. Richard's office had floor-to-ceiling windows and furniture that cost more than Marcus's truck, but the man himself looked tired, older than he'd seemed Friday. "Sit," Richard said, no preamble. Marcus sat. "How's the first day?" "Learning. Good team?" "Seem competent." Richard nodded, leaned back in his chair. "I want to tell you something I don't tell most people." Marcus waited. "The evaluation system, the tests, the scenarios?" Richard's voice carried weight. "I hate them." That caught Marcus off guard. "Sir, I hate that we need them. Hate that we can't trust credentials and references in interviews. Hate that my daughter puts herself in situations that terrify me just to catch people who lie well." He looked out the window. "But I hate what happens when we don't test even more. Your wife, my company's reputation. 3 people who died because someone valued profit over safety. Yeah." Richard turned back. "So I built a system I despise because the alternative is worse. Why tell me this? Because you're going to see things here that bother you. You're going to question whether we're ethical, whether surveillance and tests and manufactured scenarios cross lines that shouldn't be crossed." Richard stood, walked to the window. "And I need you to know that I question it too, every single day." Marcus joined him, looked out at the city. "But here's the thing," Richard continued. "The system isn't the point. The point is the standard. The expectation that character matters more than credentials. That what you do when no one's watching defines who you are more than what you do on stage." He turned to face Marcus. "That motel, that test, that wasn't about catching you doing something good. It was about establishing a baseline, a standard. You helped someone when it cost you something and gained you nothing. That's the person I need in this building, not because I can control you, because I can trust you." Marcus met his eyes. "And if that person changes, if working here turns me into someone who performs integrity instead of living it, then I failed you," Richard said simply. "And you should quit." They stood in silence. Finally, Marcus asked, "What happens now?" "Now you do the job. You lead your team. You make decisions. You help people." Richard smiled slightly. "And you stop wondering if someone's watching." "Are they?" "Always. But not because we're testing you." Richard walked back to his desk. "Because we're learning from you. Because character isn't something you teach through policy manuals and training videos. It's something you model, something you demonstrate, something you live loudly enough that other people can see what it looks like." Marcus understood then. The evaluation hadn't ended Friday. It would never end, not because Hartwell kept testing, but because life kept asking the same question over and over. Who are you when no one important is watching? And the only way to answer was to keep being that person when everyone was. "Get back to work, Mr. Brennan," Richard said. Marcus headed for the door. "Marcus?" He stopped, turned. Richard's expression softened just slightly. "Thank you for that night. Real or not, test or not, you helped my daughter when you thought she needed it. As a father, that means something." Marcus nodded, left the office, took the elevator down, walked back into security operations where 3 people he barely knew were protecting a company built on the idea that character could be measured. Devin looked up. "Everything okay, boss?" Marcus sat at his desk, opened his laptop, started reviewing security protocols. "Yeah," he said, "everything's fine." And for the first time since Friday, he meant it. Not because he'd figured everything out, but because he'd stopped trying to. He was Marcus Brennan. He helped people when they needed it. He made decisions that cost him something. He operated the same way at 3 a.m. in a failing motel as he did at noon in a corporate office. That was the standard. Not performance, not evaluation, just who he was when no one was grading him. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough.